Good afternoon. How are you? Okay, so I have a presentation because I can't talk without the support of a presentation. I will talk plus I will show you the data on screen. So how does this look like? The evolving global and Indian backdrop for BFSI? भारी भरकम है ना? मैं वही करता हूँ, भारी भरकम ज्ञान देता हूँ. उसका रीजन भी है, घर में कोई सुनता नहीं है. So yes, I will give you global GAN and Bharatiya GAN as well. So let's move on. So what is this thing about global soft landing? So this is the global narrative now. In official events, evening parties, this is the point of discussion, soft landing. Now what is the meaning of this soft landing? Just to take you through the background, the backdrop and recap what has been happening. 2020, COVID, lockdown, global degrowth. All countries in the world going through a degrowth. So what did the world do? Central banks all over the world, like the US Fed, like our RBI, they cut rates significantly and they pumped in huge amount of liquidity. What did the governments do? They ran up huge fiscal deficit, they pumped in lot of money. Why? Because that is the only thing governments and authorities can do. Now what does that lead to? When interest rates are very low, it means money is cheap. When money is cheap, it means people can take more money, utilize more money. And when government is pumping in more money on top of that, what does it mean? Even more money, flood of money. So what does that lead to? That leads to inflation. Just to give an idea of the size, लोग बोलते हैं कि US में आज जितने भी पैसा है, जितने में डॉलर फ्लो कर रही है, the country has been there for like about 200 years or whatever number of years. People say that 35 to 40% of the entire money in circulation in the USA today has been created, I won't say print, the print hota nahi hai, has been created in the 3 years post-COVID. How does it sound like? पूरे यूएस में जितने पैसा आज घूम रही है उसका 35 to 40% has been created in the 3 years post-COVID because their situation was bad and they had to pump in so much of money. Now as I said, so much of liquidity, interest rate cut, cheap money. So it had to show up in inflation. And when did that show up? So 20 ho gaya, 21. The world economy was gradually recovering. On a low base, ek do kadam badha ke they were recovering. Then 22 happened. 22 what happened? Hello? 2022 में दुनिया में कुछ हुआ था क्या? No? Have you heard of a country called Russia? Have you heard of a country called Ukraine? दोनों में कुछ युद्ध हुआ था, ऐसा कुछ सुना है आपने? तो बोलते क्यों नहीं? मैंने तो सुना था, लोग बोलते हैं कि एक देश है रशिया करके, एक देश है यूक्रेन करके, दोनों में कुछ युद्ध लग गया था, तो मैंने भी सुना था. So what happened after that? That heavy term of supply chain disruption means what? Inflation. So they were waiting for a trigger for the inflation to happen, and after this Russia-Ukraine war broke out and supply chain disruption, whatever happened, that showed up in inflation. So again, COVID, lockdown, pumping in money, interest rate cut, 22, inflation going up. So what did governments do and what did central banks do? So central banks all over the world like US Fed, our RBI, they know only two medicines. One is interest rate cut, interest rate hike, and the other is pumping in money, taking away money. So what central banks did all over the world, 22 onwards, they hiked interest rates significantly. Okay? So then the question is, when money is not cheap, when money is expensive, people will take less of loans, which means growth may be impacted. So hard landing means because of high interest rate, the world may go through a recession. It may or may not, but that is the apprehension that the world may go through a recession. What is the definition of recession? The technical definition is 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. It actually happened. In 22, the first 2 quarters in the USA, they had 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. But yes, now they have recovered. So after that, all over the world except China, they have been hiking rates. Be it US, be it Europe, be it our India, we have been hiking rates. So the question is, can the global economy survive and can the global economy still grow after so much of significant rate hikes? And that is the thing we are discussing now, global soft landing. अभी ऐसा लग रहा है कि in spite of so much of rate hikes and this global liquidity, so governments all over the world, central banks all over the world, they are taking away some liquidity, not as much, but to an extent they are taking away some liquidity from the system. Can the world still grow even after that? Answer is yes. So soft landing means वो हमने सहन कर लिया and we are still growing even after so much of this thing. So I will now show you some numbers on this. What is this soft landing? So if you can see this from the back, not very readable. Look at the last data point. This is World Bank data taken from RBI, but it is World Bank data. So World Bank says 24 the world will grow at 2.9%. Yani दुनिया का GDP will grow at 2.9%. Not a very high growth rate, but not bad also, in the sense there is some growth across the world. So 2.9 is okayish kind of growth. And now look at some more numbers. US. Earlier World Bank said 0.8%, now they are saying 1.6%. For a country like US, 0.8 is a low growth rate. 1.6 also is low, but ठीक है, चलता है types. Look at Euro area. Now they are saying only 0.7%. Means just better than zero. Japan 0.7, 0.9, that kind of thing. And look at this, and look at the bright spot here. Can you read this number? Yes. And what does that mean? मेरे प्यारे देशवासियों, आज पूरे विश्व में भारत की प्रगति सबसे द्रुत गति है कि नहीं? हेलो, कुछ गलत बोल दिया? सब चुप क्यों हो गए? So this is the bright spot. Brazil 1.5, Russia 1.3. Now China, look here, 4.5%. Again, this is Chinese data. You know what is the Chinese data? हाँ, आप समझ गए क्या बोल रहा हूँ? Okay, now look at this. I'm talking of soft landing. Soft landing means the world will grow, world GDP will grow in spite of rate hikes. Now look at this. This dark blue line is 23. 23 खत्म हो गया, but this reason I'm showing you. Look at this. This vertical line is the last forecast of 22. Now look at this. This 23 wala forecast, it is coming down, 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 and this is the last projection for 23. And from the last projection of 23, it is going up and up and up, which means 23 surprised positively. Don't ask me how or why, मुझे नहीं पता. It happened. यानी कि 2023 ने दुनिया को चौंका दिया, अच्छा किया. From projection of here, it growth was here. And look at this. This is 24. Projection was here. Now it is going okayish, and 25 is now somewhere here. Which basically means in spite of softer projections, 23 was on the positive side, which now makes us believe that yes, we are going in for a soft landing. What is the implication of soft landing for India? Tell me, anyone? No bhari bharkam gyan, only simple words. अगर दुनिया में hard landing होता, तो what would have been the implication for us? Hello? क्लियर कुछ नहीं है? So our country has something called exports. कुछ सुना है कभी? Exports क्या होता है? Exports depends on what? फिरंग लोगों की ग्रोथ हो रही है कि नहीं? अगर फिरंगों की ग्रोथ होगी तो भी हम एक्सपोर्ट करेंगे नहीं करेंगे. As simple as that. So now what we are saying is soft landing means दुनिया में थोड़ा बहुत ग्रोथ होगी. So our exports will be kind of there. That is the implication for India. Okay. Now talking of rate hikes, like I said earlier, दुनिया भर में बहुत ज़्यादा rate hike हुआ. Now if you look at this pace, March 22 से चालू हुआ. This, the ladders you see, the steps you see, the US Federal Reserve. This, I have not shown you the history here. If you look at long history, this is one of the fastest ever rate hikes in a very short span of time. If you look at 120-year history, in a very short span of time, US Federal Reserve ने इतना ज़्यादा rate बढ़ा दिया because their inflation was very high. They have no other medicine, don't have anything else, so they had to hike rates significantly. And this is, at least you can imagine from here how much they hiked rates. Same thing for Europe. Same problem, inflation very high, they can't help it. And by the way, one thing about Europe which is not popularly discussed is that their growth rate is a big challenge. They are, like I showed you some numbers there, it's like next to zero. Their flagship country, Germany, once Germany used to be a global trade surplus, net surplus, now they are net deficit. Their flagship country, Germany, their growth is like sometimes zero, sometimes minus something, they are like tottering. And that is the situation today of the Eurozone. It looks like hai, firang hai, jo bhi hai, but that is the real situation today. But even they had to hike rates so much. And another thing, no central bank will tell you openly, in US and Europe, they have a very heavy pile of debt. The kind of bonds they have issued, the government, household, corporates, the kind of bonds they have issued, the government is sitting in a very huge pile of debt, which means very high servicing cost. The more they issue debt, the more the stock piles up, and the more they get towards the debt trap. So somehow they have to reverse. I'll come to that in gradually. So this is the hike in US and Europe. India also we hiked rates. We hiked our repo rate. Now after so much of rate hikes, you see inflation coming down. See, this is the global headline inflation, kind of average. So look here, it is coming down. So why did inflation come down? So after the Russia-Ukraine war broke out, all the supply chain disruption and all those big words, inflation went up, and now global inflation has come down. How has it come down? One is rate hikes, and the other is something called base effect. Inflation is calculated year on year, which means अगर पिछले साल वो टाइम ज़्यादा था, ये साल ये टाइम कम होगा. That works across all countries. So 22, the base was high, so 23 inflation was low. But central banks are projecting whatever inflation data they have. So now based on this inflation coming down, now the whole world we are talking about rate cuts, the possibility of rate cuts. Okay, I am showing you something here. What is this thing about rate cut? Or first of all, why should countries cut rates? Firstly, inflation is coming down, it's in a whatever acceptable range, so they will cut rates. Other is the global growth. Like I said, yes, we are having growth, but the growth rate is not very buoyant, not very bullish. So again, some reason to cut rates. And something which nobody will tell you openly, their stockpile of debt is huge. Like in US, it is $34 trillion. Only a number, but the number is huge. $34 trillion they have to service. So somewhere they have to cut rates. Now what is the probability? So there are numbers. So we get these numbers from Bloomberg, we get this number, this is a publicly available website called CME FedWatch tool, you can see the numbers there. What they do is they impute the probability of rate cuts from the traded level of US Fed Funds futures. So what you see here, if you can see the screen from behind, if you can see this date. There are announced dates of meetings of US Fed, our RBI. So on a particular date, as you can see, 12th June, this is the probability of rate cut. So currently they have this rate, if you can see it's very small font. 5/4, 5/2. So what the market is saying that in the meeting on 12th June, there is 64 plus 16 plus 1 whatever. This is the probability of rate cut by the US Fed in their meeting on 12th June. Am I clear, not clear? If you have any question, you can ask me. If it is not clear. All clear? Now coming to the exception, China. And follow this line carefully. So look at this, 2019 was a normal year, 2020 was when COVID struck, but look here, even before COVID struck, China cut rates, means they are in bad shape. 2020 obviously, the entire world is in bad shape, the entire world cut rates, China also cut rates. Now look here, 22, what was happening in the world? दुनिया में क्या हो रहा था? दुनिया भर में inflation was very high and the entire world was hiking rates. US, Europe, India, all countries in the world. And look here, in 22 also, China has been cutting rates, means they are in such a bad shape. So about China, we get some news on media, social media, all these things about, Evergrande, Country Garden, sometimes we see in media or social media. But the point is, they are not getting inflation. So as per economic theory, it is said that mild inflation like 1 to 3% is good because that shows traction in the country, which they are not getting. So what is happening today is, today China is becoming the next Japan. They are searching for inflation and maybe to an extent they are searching for growth also. So now look at this, 22, 23, entire this thing they have been cutting rates. They don't have inflation, they have whatever growth they have officially announced, like I showed you that 4-5% whatever they have officially announced. Plus they have their financial sector issues and they have a huge stockpile of debt, so somehow they are trying to manage themselves. So if you can see this chart clearly, this is their trend. So people say whatever growth China has today is driven by consumption. Investment also, investment they have made and consumption. Now look at this consumption. This was the pre-COVID trend and they have fallen behind the trend. So what is the implication of China not growing as much? We have some exports to China but not as much. We are not as impacted by say exports to USA or Eurozone. We have some impact. The other impact is China not growing as much is in a way good for us. Why? You have to understand the equation. The equation is we India, we require lot of commodities. What do we require? What do we import? Yes, loudly. Oil, biggest import. So all these commodities, be it oil, be it iron, be it steel, be it copper, whatever, all metals, oils, everything, China is the biggest consumer in the world. They are the guzzler. If they are not growing at a fast pace, they will not import as much, and if they don't import as much, the prices of these commodities would not go up as much, which means it is good for our inflation also. Because if China goes at a fast pace, they will have a high inflation, as in commodity prices will be higher, and that will impact our inflation also. See, in a way it is good that China is not going at a very fast pace. Okay, like I said, China going through deflation. Look at these numbers. This is the zero line. And see, consecutive months, October, November, December, January, consecutive months, they are going through deflation, not inflation but deflation. See, minus 0.2, minus 0.5, minus 0.3, minus 0.8. So economists say that plus 1, plus 2, plus 3% inflation is good because that shows traction in the country, in the economy. It shows that the country is growing. So how or what they're growing, I don't know. That was one part. Any questions still here? Am I clear, not clear? Should I carry on? Okay. Now coming to this, what are the risks today? One is geopolitical risk. I've taken this from one RBI publication. They have some measure of measuring this. Geopolitical risks indicator. Today, geopolitical risk is a big risk. And today, my individual view, you may agree, you may disagree. Whatever we are seeing today, we are seeing Russia-Ukraine, we are seeing Palestine-Israel, we are seeing all this China-Taiwan, all those things. This will be the order of the day, and there's a reason for that. Earlier, US was the big dada of the world. Today, they are no more the big dada of the world. So today, there will be no clear leader. There's nobody who can shut up others. So everybody is a king today, or whatever, small king, whatever you call it. So these small skirmishes will keep on happening and will keep on increasing, but there will not be any world war. The reason is every country knows and every political leader knows war has a big cost. So somehow they will try to avoid a very large scale war. Today if you look at news, at one point of time Russia-Ukraine was a daily discussion. Today it is like the earlier days we had that US-Vietnam, some small corner of the newspaper. Today Russia-Ukraine is like a small corner of the newspaper. Today Israel, Palestine is okay, kuch na kuch chal raha hai. Something more will break out tomorrow, but again that will be kind of chalta hai types. So we will see more of these global events breaking out. Another thing, look here. Global banks have been reducing US Treasury holdings of late. Whatever is happening in the world or not happening, how do or where do we come to know from? We come to know from through media and social media. Now there are certain things, certain significant events which are somehow not discussed in media and social media. And one such big global event, as per my opinion, has not been as discussed as it should have been. After the Russia-Ukraine war broke out, Russian money was forfeited by USA. Think of it. Sounds small, sounds simple, but think of it. Whatever they did, whatever Russia did, human rights violation or whatever, Russia is a sovereign country. And US, which is another sovereign country, they just forfeited Russian money, unko SWIFT se bhi nikal diya. So what does it mean? The entire world got the message, and all governments of all countries got the message that today if one country called USA, if they can do it to another country called Russia, tomorrow they can do it to any other country. That any other country could be China, could be Japan, could be India, could be Iran, Iraq, UAE, anybody, they can do it. So governments did not make a noise, but gradually the entire world is pulling off from this. If you can see this curve coming down. Tell me one this thing, US Treasury, like we have our India government bonds, US they call it treasuries. Apart from the people in US itself, who are the biggest buyers of US treasuries? Apart from the US Fed or people or institutions in the USA, who are the biggest buyers of US treasuries? Any idea? Any guess?
Japan.
Yes, Japan and China. China and Japan, they are the biggest buyers. Last 1 year, China and Japan have been net sellers of US treasuries. They have been selling off. Today the only buyers are people in US itself, and maybe some should put sovereign wealth fund somewhere in some country of the world. So look at this. Also, if you look at it, gradually our RBI, they have been increasing the gold reserves because they also want to diversify away from US dollar. It won't come in the media, but the entire world is diversifying. Like whatever we see today, that global trade settlement in non-USD currencies, be it our INR, be it some other currency, it is happening. Because, so one this thing is something called TINA, T-I-N-A, no alternative. Today there is no alternative for US as the global reserve currency, but there may be unilateral transactions. Like Argentina paying off debt to the IMF in some other currency like Chinese yuan. Imagine Argentina paying off debt to IMF in Chinese yuan. We couldn't think of these things earlier, but these things are happening today. So global change of the world order is happening. Okay. Now we come to Bhartiya Gyan. Ye global ho gaya. Now coming to Bhartiya Gyan, what is this fiscal discipline? I'll again show you some old data. If you can read this, I'm showing you 2020 data. 2020, what was happening? COVID, lockdown, global degrowth, Indian degrowth, economy was not growing, we are behind our doors, and the GDP is shrinking, and the government has to spend more money. And to spend more money, the government has to run up a higher fiscal discipline. If you can see the chart here, you can see all the names of these countries. All the Firangi countries are here. Japan is also there. And this is, so one is this additional spending and foregone revenue, this lal wala bar. And this is loans, equity and guarantees, this blue wala bar. If you can see the tall bars here, which are the countries? Italy, there is Japan, this is what? US, then France and Turkey. And the red bars also like US, Japan, they pumped up so much of fiscal deficit. And the entire world was giving Gyan to India that you should spend more, your country is in trouble, and you should run up even more fiscal deficit. We did not do that. And to clarify here, if you recall in 2020, what was the government announcing? During this, spending more, what was that headline thing?
Loan EMI waiver.
No, wo hai, that headline word, there was a big headline word going on, catchphrase, Atmanirbhar Bharat. But the point is, whatever amount was termed in that, so शुरू में आत्मनिर्भर भारत 1, 2, 3 आ रहे थे, आत्मनिर्भर भारत 1, 20 लाख करोड़, it's a big number, but the point is that was the headline number. Actual में उतना नहीं था, that was a whatever, marketing or whatever you call it. Actually we followed fiscal discipline. If you can see India here, इतना. So we followed fiscal discipline because एक बार discipline टूट गया, वापस आने में उतनी ही दिक्कत होती है. Now coming to current times. So look here. This is fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit means the amount of fiscal deficit which the central government is running as a percentage of GDP. So look at this, FY21, financial year 2021, it was 9.2% of GDP. Why? Government spent more, they had to spend more, and GDP itself was low, so it was 9.2% of GDP. Now after that it was time to come back to fiscal discipline, which the government is gradually doing. So FY22, it was 6.8% of GDP, then 6.4, then 5.8. This year, FY24, they are projecting 5.8% of GDP, and next year they are projecting 5.1% of GDP, which means deficit will be there, but they are gradually coming to the path of discipline in the sense they are spending less and less, and also the quality is improving. Quality means more of capital expenditure and less of revenue expenditure. This is our growth. So look here, FY21, see this, ye niche hai bar, has to be 2020 lockdown, the world not growing, we not growing, all inside our homes and all that. So FY21, we had a degrowth, as in GDP came down by so much, 6%, 5.8%. FY22, you see a growth of 9.1%, looks good but not so good because it's on a low base. On a low base, we grew 9.1%. After that, 7.2 in FY23, and for FY24, RBI says 7%, the government says, CSO says 7.3%. And for next year, that is FY25, RBI says 7%, which is goodish kind of growth. Okay, I have a few more slides. Any questions here? Dunya ka gyan, Bharat ka gyan, anything you want to ask me? Am I clear throughout? Okay, good. Now coming to BFSI. Now what you see here, like Pankaj ji said, market cap. Now market cap, as you know, is nobody's view, nobody's opinion, it is the entire market. So in this Nifty 50, this is the breakup sector wise, and you see here financials. In Nifty 50, the market cap weightage of financials is 35.3%, which is the highest. Look at the pie. Look at the other sectors, IT so much, whatever you can see here, energy, consumer staples, consumer discretionary, industrials, only so much. It was even higher earlier, by the way. It was like 38%. Now it is like 35.3%, which shows the importance of BFSI sector in the entire economy, or this reflects the opinion of the market, all the market participants, about how much importance, how much weightage should be given to the BFSI sector. Now look at this. What do banks do? Banks take deposit and banks give loans. And where do banks give loans, or who takes loans from banks? Now look at this. Rupees lakh crore, latest data. If you can see the numbers from behind, so food is only so much, agriculture, priority sector so much, industry, services, personal, retail. The takeaway, at least for me, is that look at the size of this segment, personal retail. This is the biggest chunk. So we have been discussing payments, we have been discussing cash flows, and we have been discussing growth of payment systems, and see here. At one point of time, earlier it was roughly one-third, 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 meaning roughly one-third for industry, one-third for services, and one-third for personal. And to clarify, industry also is growing, by the way. Relatively small, but it means that personal or retail is growing even faster rate. What is this personal or retail? Home loans, auto loans, personal loans. That is growing at an even faster rate, which is why this chunk is bigger. Industry also is growing, this much share of the pie they have, and services. What is services? Any service. It could be railways, it could be aviation, it could be software, it could be entertainment, anything. Any services comes under this. And this industry, large and MSME all included, this is the distribution of the pie. 156 lakh crore is the amount of loans given by the banking industry. So my two last slides. This is one circular which came from RBI on 15th of January. You can read the text. SRO for the fintech sector. And what is the significance of this date of 15th January? 15th January was before 31st January. And I can't say anything because I'm a freelancer. So 31st January is the date when Paytm broke out, if I recall correctly. So even before RBI did that Paytm thing on 31st January, on 15th January they came up with this. And what does RBI say? Self-regulation requires a well-defined structure based on consensus and cooperation amongst the entities. I will show you some more text. You can read about their guidelines about the SRO thing. So of course we will grow. Today we are the fastest growing major economy in the world. Our UPI is unchallenged in the world. All these things are there, but regulation also is as important. I am open to any question, but Mohit is standing here. Mohit is smiling. So will you allow me one or two questions? Yes, I'll be more than happy. मुझे कोई पूछता ही नहीं है. Was it too heavy? पूरा ऊपर से गया? या पूरा clear हो गया? पूरा clear हो गया? No questions? Everywhere. Mint also. Okay, so I'm here for some time. Yeah.
Since I have a question, जो growth हम अभी देख रहे हैं, let's say 7% or 7.3%, do you think this is as per our current appetite, or do you think it's an imbalanced growth or a balanced growth?
It is a balanced growth. To give you some numbers, what economists are saying is it will become little soft, not much, it will become little soft. What is the meaning of little soft? That 7% may become 6.5%. Why so? I am no economist, to give you some background on this thing. In the RBI, there is something called a Monetary Policy Committee. So it's a 6-member committee which decides the interest rate, like repo rate, badega, kam hoga, the committee decides that. The committee comprises 3 people from RBI itself, like governor, deputy governor, and 3 external experts, like economists and all that there. So there are 2 external economists who say now it is the time for rate cut because our growth is good, 7% is good. But it may not remain 7% forever, it may become softer like 6.5, 6, whatever. So there is a reason, there is a rationale to cut rates to a certain extent. So yes, it is balanced, maybe whatever, 6, 7% that should remain.
Last question.
Sure.
The lending rate of the RBI circular on the lending.
SRO.
Yeah, the 125% on the capital.
अच्छा NBFC वाला हाँ हाँ.
Now that mandate which has come, to best of my knowledge, is largely to curb the way bank is giving loans to or bank is lending to the NBFCs. So at the end of the day, what is NBFC is doing is that there is little bit of irresponsible lending done in the economy, and to curb that, what they are saying is because पैसा आपने बैंक से ही उठाया है तो कल को पूरा सिस्टम बिगड़ जाएगा अगर कुछ भी NBFCs वापस रिकवर नहीं कर पाई. At the end of the day, they will not going to pay back to the bank, and that will put a lot of pressure onto the entire banking system. Now, what is your view on this 125% which they have increased? Is that going to curb the problem? Is that going to mitigate the problem, or you think it is?
Yeah. So, I tell you my reading of this things about banking. Sir is here; he will answer. But anyway, I tell you my interpretation of this thing. When you look at those charts and data and all those things now, the way loans are like I showed you the distribution. Retail is the biggest chunk now. The way it was growing, the growth rate in the personal retail loan sector and even within that in the unsecured sector was relatively high. In the sense, सब कुछ बढ़ रहा है, but that unsecured sector was growing at an even faster rate. So what RBI thought is, अभी तक कोई accident हुआ नहीं है, कुछ event हुआ नहीं है, but event होने का chances है. So what it means is RBI thought that even before an accident happens, even before an incident happens, let me put some risk controls there. And what are these controls? They did two things. One is NBFCs lending to retail, personal loans in an unsecured manner, and banks giving loans to NBFCs, both ways. And what they said is nothing to stop them, but they increase the capital adequacy. So what is the meaning of capital adequacy? Capital adequacy means to do so much of business, like 100 rupees of business, आपके पास इतना capital होना चाहिए. So when RBI says not 100% but 125%, it means RBI is gradually increasing the, or to an extent increasing the capital requirement, which means आपको ज़्यादा पैसा, ज़्यादा capital रखना पड़ेगा, which means in a way you are more safe, more secure. Now to answer your question, when this came out, there were multiple reports by multiple research agencies. What they said is there would be a very marginal impact on growth, which is in a way good for the long run. More capital requirement, yes, it will increase the cost of capital, increase the cost of business by whatever 0.5% or whatever percentage that I can check those reports. Yes, that will happen, but it is good for the controlled or balanced growth of the system, so that there is no accident, there is no event in future.
But at the end of the day, impact customer को है, तो interest उसका भी बढ़ेगा. So मतलब आप पैसा यहाँ से ज़्यादा रखेंगे तो interest आप नीचे customer को ज़्यादा charge करेंगे.
सिगरेट के पैकेट में रहता है ना, cigarette smoking is injurious for health. I didn't say that. Yes, sir.
BFSI also will have to diversify their source of funds instead of merely depending on the bank. And if the bank gets the lending more than BFSI, what BFSI gets as a risk becomes a systemic.
That's exactly.
That is the one. Second, in the unsecured credit, the purpose of lending or the utilization of credit is not. So, encourage, there may be opportunity for personal lending, but it should not grow at a speed or much faster than normal. I think 48% growth or 20% growth is the correct. उसके बाद अभी आने के बाद अभी including your credit card outstandings have come down. So anytime when you find heat in the any types of credit, then the RBI intervenes by risk weights. So that is the fact, as he rightly said. One is you are aware of the risk, so you have the risk weights higher. Second, your capital also gets reduced in terms of the risk weights and the features. So then your ability to lend also is better. So that was the thing they did.
So that's a smart. Yes, it was very much smarted also.
I'll make one last point since Sir spoke about diversification. There is a circular from SEBI which came about 4 साल पहले, which says large corporates have to borrow at least 25% of their requirements from the issuance of bonds, not just bank loans. Like sir said ना, हाँ corporate sector का.
One is SEBI का है. Second, RBI has also brought, and among the large advances, if they are borrowing 10,000 crores above from their requirements from the bank, then 50% should be by the bonds, 50% only by the bank.
Yes.
Because that is again for any corporate falling down, your exposure being very high, you have a systemic risk. So that they wanted to take it. SEBI ने 25% बोला, पर बैंक का रिजर्व बैंक का ज़्यादा है.
Okay, so thank you so much. I'm here for some more time, and Mohit is here.